One of the deepest yearnings during a spiritual awakening is to commune with our spirit guides. So today I'm going to be explaining exactly what spirit guides are and how they communicate with us. What we call spirit guides are like echoes of future versions of ourselves. So with the metaphysical nature of reality being the quantum field holds many possibilities. It's even been known as the everywhere and every when location. So the everywhere and every when location that we know as the quantum field has so many different versions of us because it's holding within the quantum field all the different choices that lead to different outcomes. And those different outcomes create different future versions of ourselves. And so since the quantum field can hold all of those and it doesn't make you choose, then at that level of reality, which is what we know as the fifth dimensional range and beyond, that level of reality holds more than just one choice or one possibility or even one version of us. So at that point, things become very multifold, which is why we know the word multidimensional so well in this age. Because at that level of reality, the concept of oneness or unity is far more real or far more actualized than it is here. So when we're talking about there being multiple versions of us, and these multiple different versions of us are our spirit guides, we're talking about the quantum field and all of the different potentials that can exist in the quantum field based off of different trajectories. So these different trajectories can all coexist because of the reality of oneness or unity that takes place in the higher densities or dimensions. Spirit guides can be looked at like an echo of our current self. And that echo carries over into each dimension. So they are a part of our stream of consciousness, but in different distances, just like an echo. Spirit guides equally benefit from assisting us because they too are beings who are evolving, and they develop their own consciousness by learning how to assist us. Technically, not all spirit guides are us from another dimension. Some of our spirit guides can come from agreements we made with a beneficial being before incarnating. The reason these agreements are made is because they have a special skill or valuable frequency, which would strongly help us here in our purpose. So if we really want to understand spirit guides, what we need to first learn is the term affinity. Affinity with an A, not an I. Affinity is a very important term that will help you not only understand spirit guides, but affinity is going to help you understand any esoteric knowledge, any spiritual knowledge, any metaphysical knowledge. So whatever you're interested in the occult or in the metaphysical, you're going to need to understand deeply what affinity is. Now in alchemy, we call affinity sympathy, but affinity is going to be a far more useful term in order to understand this. Sympathy. So what affinity means is having shared attributes, having a likeness, having there be similarities in our nature and those future versions' nature. So there is an attraction, like a magnetization through those shared attributes, through that likeness. How we know this here in this realm is like attracts like. That's what sympathy means. That's what affinity means. There's this resemblance in nature. The resemblances in our nature into their nature, our spirit guides' nature. And that's what lines us up with any spirit guides at any given time. It is our affinity with them. So our affinity being our inherent characteristics, our shared characteristics, our shared attributes, all create affinity. In the most basic sense, if we like the element of fire, and we're very aligned with and attracted to this element of fire, more so than the other elements, then that is a perfect example of how we will share an affinity with one of those future versions of ourselves that is the full evolution of that element of fire, or also holds a very strong likeness and a very strong attraction to the element of fire. And what is fire? Fire itself holds different attributes within it. Fire is an element that has distinct qualities to it and distinct characteristics. So we can even hold an affinity with fire. We can hold affinities with elements in nature, and we do so. And just as we have shared characteristics and affinities with elements in nature, so too are those mirrored in our relationships with higher beings, with our spirit guides, with our future versions of ourselves. And so anytime we're considering ourselves to have a spirit guide and we want to know something about their nature, we want to know something about them, but we feel too blocked in our own psychic capabilities and in our own intuition, and so we feel disconnected from our spirit guides in that sense, we need not look any further than seeing what our own nature is in this moment and seeing what our own characteristics and our own attributes are displaying in this moment. And that can give us a glimpse into our spirit guides. So in short, our spirit guides are us, and they took different trajectories for their evolutionary process. And because the quantum field holds more than just one potential, holds more than just one trajectory or one timeline, they have different versions of us, and they're operating on different dimensions, and they're operating as completely different attributes that have different affinities. And so in this sense, we can also look at spirit guides as distinct archetypes. They hold archetypal energy because they are the full maturing of a given pathway towards evolution. Because there's more than one pathway that a being can choose to evolve. And so a spirit guide would be the full embodiment and the full actualization of one of those given pathways towards evolution, one of those trajectories. And then another spirit guide would be another pathway towards evolution that chose different trajectories, chose differently. And so these different versions of us are different expressions of us that lead to their peak being an archetype, because by the time it gets to an archetype, you're looking at the original blueprint of a certain characteristic. So it's that original piece of consciousness. It's that original template that stores within it, that embodies within it all of the characteristics of a theme, or all of the characteristics of one perception, one way of being in existence. And so when a pathway or a trajectory gets seen through to evolution, what it does is lead to different parts of existence. It chose to explore a certain theme in existence and then grow and develop and mature based off of that. One of our guides may have fully embraced a pathway of unconditional love. So that guide would be one that helps us open our heart and learn to see in a more heart-centered way. Another guide may have fully embraced a pathway of wisdom until they reached a level of mastery. Yet another may have chosen to fully embrace and develop their feminine energy into a heightened state. How they communicate is through whatever way will grab our attention. If we are thinking certain thoughts or saying something unknowingly significant, they will try to emphasize those things by grabbing our attention. This can be through ringing in the ear or by a light inside our room, all of a sudden dipping out and then coming back. Anything that will pull our attention so that we become more aware of the thing that was just being thought or said. So the most subtle way they will operate is through inspiration, and the most direct way they communicate is by altering our environment in a way that will make us examine what we are currently doing. And so because of that, our spirit guides are feeding us in the past back their gifts, their energy, their resources, and we run those. And that's what inspires us, and that's what motivates us, and that's what moves us and compels us in a certain direction. So they feed us, and they feed us through inspiration. They feed us through the wisdom that they have learned from their unique pathway of evolution. So our spirit guides aren't in competition. By the time they've played out to its maturity, their pathway, they are simply feeding us the fruits, the wisdom, and the gifts from that pathway. And so in that way, our biggest relationship with our spirit guides are as muses. In fact, affinity can be looked at in a more poetic way as calling it our muses. They inspire us and we inspire them. We influence them and they influence us through that feedback loop and through that affinity. Spirit guides don't know every single detail of every single thing that will happen inside our lives. What they're doing is looking at our current pathway towards evolution, and they're helping us navigate through influencing us, through even bodily sensory sensations that we might feel. They're helping navigate us through our intuition and through our inspiration, even through synchronicities. But they're not concerned with controlling us, and they're not concerned with putting themselves into us and having them animated so that we can just walk around as puppets to their choices. What spirit guides do is look at us in our present moment, and they can see our future timelines based off of the choices that we're going to make and that we are currently making. And from that, which changes a lot, it changes vastly depending on how much we are making very bold and empowering choices. So those constantly change. Spirit guides are not neurotic. They don't know everything. They're not trying to know everything. They're simply trying to help guide us with their gifts, with their resources, with their tools. So they're there to help provide what they can provide based off of their mastery down their pathway. And so to have more than one spirit guide is highly beneficial because now we're getting more tools, more energy, and more resources from different guides, which will help us in this present moment feel hopefully more either supported or more capable of making free will choices because we're not dependent on them. As a matter of fact, if you want to never speak to your spirit guides again, the number one way you can make sure that never happens is becoming highly dependent on them. Because the more dependency that they feel that is coming from an individual consciousness, they're going to understand that they are no longer in a helpful and supportive role. This being us, is giving them too much power, and they don't want that. They're not service to self oriented. They're not detrimentally oriented. So they're going to see when it's crossing over into unhealthy boundaries where we're just trying to have them make our choices for us, have us live our life for them, like tag team them, swap them out. And they're going to go, I am no longer being able to help this person directly because now they're too dependent on my help and they don't understand the actual contract, our actual relationship. So with all of my unconditional love, I'm going to take a back seat and just help in very indirect ways. And that will look like feeling disconnected from our spirit guides when that is not the case at all. In fact, we are never disconnected from our spirit guides. Whatever they're doing in a current moment or a current situation is always looking at our free will and with their unconditional love, trying to see how best they can provide their resources based off of our own maturity and our own level of awakening. In my video, The Higher Self Explained, I talk about how the higher self is our future self. Well, the higher self can actually be looked at as the accumulation of all of the future selves into the composite character, into the composite energy of that unity. And when it reaches that unity of all of the future selves, us included, then it reaches a oneness. And that oneness can be called a culmination of the higher self. So the higher self, even though it is one being or entity, is really being fed in a multidimensional way from all the different experiences that it has gained its wisdom from. Now, to understand anything more beyond this point about spirit guides, we have to talk about wavelengths. Just like there's different radio stations that are on different radio channels, so too are all of our consciousness on different wavelengths. And these wavelengths act in a very metaphysical way when our consciousness is on the same wavelength as another consciousness. And what I mean by in a metaphysical way is that when our consciousness is on a certain frequency bandwidth, or when our consciousness is on a certain wavelength, and another being's consciousness is on that same wavelength, dialed into that same frequency, from a metaphysical viewpoint, they have now merged into unity. So that's why we have such a strong resonance with others that we see ourselves in, that we call soulmates. To understand more about that, you can watch my video on it titled Your Soul Family. So soulmates are all, anyone, even if you don't know them, even if you haven't met them yet, they are all people or beings, consciousness that is dialed in to the same wavelength that you are on right now. And if you shift to a higher frequency wavelength, then you will have new soulmates waiting for you at that frequency and at that wavelength. So from the metaphysical realm's perspective, which would mean that we zoom all the way out and we see everything from the largest and most broadest perspective, if we were to be on the same wavelength, our consciousness on the same wavelength as another being's consciousness, from the metaphysical viewpoint, that is perceived as unity. And because of that, our spirit guides are perceived as us, even if we didn't actually play out those evolutionary pathways. It is still as though we did and we are them. That's how seriously unity gets when we're talking about it from higher dimensions. Because if we're just talking about unity here from this dimension, we go, yeah, I get it. Yeah, we're all one. But it's a literal form of existence when we're getting to the higher dimensions. In fact, unity is the biggest theme at a certain point and on. So when our consciousness is on the same wavelength as another being's consciousness, they're perceived in unity. And our spirit guides are then aligned with us in such a way to where it doesn't actually ever matter from the universe's perspective if those beings are actually us who played out those actual choices, because the quantum field will just line up and make it appear as though it was us. So what this means is that the spirit guides aren't starting from the third dimension here as a human and actually making different choices that lead to different outcomes in different dimensions. Instead, because there's no such thing as time in the higher dimensions, what everything looks like is not that linear. It's way more non-linear. It's even hard for our mind in this reality to comprehend. But comprehend we must try. So in this dimension here, we don't actually have to have a literal linear timeline where we chose to take this path. And in this path, we became this archetype at a higher dimension. That could be the case, but because time is an illusion, everything's happening at once, the higher truth would be that there really only is affinity. There really only is your consciousness lining up on this wavelength with this consciousness? That's the real magic of Dharma and the present moment. It's open and it's changeable, and it is the everywhere and the every when place. If you don't believe in spirit guides because you think that they are all just trickster entities that have a negative inclination, there'll be no shelter here. I don't know how to hold space for that. That's just too paranoid. But spirit guides, just like any other concept in spirituality or in the esoteric, is going to require discernment, because there is such a thing as guides showing up in our field, and they can be looked at in a really roundabout way as spirit guides, but they're not anything in resemblance to what I just described as a true spirit guide. The reason why these negative entities show up inside our energy field and present themselves along with or beside an actual spirit guide is because it's an extension of us that is wounded and that is calling forth an aspect of itself to be healed. So it's going to sound kind of victim shaming, but it's not. That's not the intention. It's attracting a really backhanded entity to help it learn a lesson so that it can integrate that wound. That's when we're experiencing a lot of hostility from supposed guides or just things in our field. They're things that are attracted to a certain wound in us, and that in a very backhanded way are helping us integrate, but that's not their intention. It's just if we become an alchemist and if we use whatever they're pointing us to actually gain the fruits and awareness of what that is so that we can heal, we can integrate it, we can vibrate it higher, we can move its visceral experience in our body by becoming aware of it, by accepting it, and by showing it unconditional love. We're moving its vibratory rate. So we can look at it like something that was trapped in our field that we were unaware of, and it was locked into place there simply because we didn't know that our awareness needed to go there. So then the light of our awareness becomes aware of that due to some backhanded guide. So then we start looking there and going, oh, what's going on there? And that would be perceived as like a wound or an opening in our field. That then, due to the fact that we're in a free will universe, an entity can come in and kind of exploit. And so they can become opportunistic or parasitic in that way to be like, well, it's their free will and I see a wound there, like attracts like. So in this way, they're pointing us to something, but it's not in a benevolently guiding way. And that is when we see different guides show up in our field that do not have our best interest at heart, but can still be alongside spirit guides in our field. I hope this has raised your sympathy. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.